It is an image of pure asymmetry in warfare. On one side, the pinnacle of armored might, the Panzer, a steel behemoth weighing over 20 tons, armed with a high-velocity cannon that could strike from over a mile away. On the other, a machine built for speed and agility, weighing barely 400 pounds, its only protection the thin helmet on its rider's head. To send a motorcycle against the tank was not just bravery, it was, by any tactical manual, suicide. Yet in the chaotic, desperate days of May 1940, during the German blitzkrieg through France, this exact scenario unfolded not once, but repeatedly. This is the story of the solitary riders, the dispatch couriers and scouts who became improbable tank hunters. It is the story of a machine never designed for the role it was forced to play, and the men who dared to believe it could make a difference. This is the story of when a motorcycle faced a Panzer column, and the rider who carried a 20mm cannon. Our story begins with the desperate retreat of the French First Army and the British Expeditionary Force towards the Channel coast. Operation Dynamo, evacuation from Dunkirk, was being organized, but the perimeter was fragile and collapsing by the hour. To the south, German panzer divisions, having shattered Allied lines at Sedan, were racing northwards to cut off the escape. The key to slowing this armored spearhead lay in holding a series of canals and river lines. One such position was along the Labasi Canal, defended by a mixed and battered force of British infantry, engineers, and a small, specialized unit, the 1st Battalion, the Rifle Brigade, part of the British 1st Armoured Division's support group. Among these men was a 24-year-old dispatch rider from London, Private James Jim Holloway. Holloway was not a frontline soldier in the traditional sense. His weapon was his machine, a 500cc WD model, BSM-20 motorcycle. His duty was to carry messages between isolated command posts, weaving through shattered villages and fire-swept roads where radio communications had failed. The M20 was a workhorse, reliable, rugged, but utterly unarmed. A rider's personal defense was typically a standard-issue Lee Enfield rifle or a Webley revolver slung across his chest, weapons useless against the frontal armor of a German Panzer, 3 or 4. The strategic situation by May 26, 1940, was dire. The German 6th Panzer Division, under the aggressive General Werner Kemp, was pushing hard for the canal crossings. If they secured a bridgehead, they could turn the flank of the entire Dunkirk perimeter, trapping hundreds of thousands of men. The British forces at the canal were spread thin, possessing only a handful of obsolete 2-pounder anti-tank guns and a few boys, anti-tank rifles weapons that could barely scratch the paint of the advancing German armor. What they needed was mobility and firepower. What they had were a few determined men and a small fleet of motorcycles. Pause. One of those machines was about to be transformed. The transformation began not with a grand order, but with a desperate act of field improvisation. A young, innovative lieutenant in the Royal Engineers, attached to the Rifle Brigade, had an idea. The engineers, working through the night of May 26th, fabricated a crude but sturdy sidecar frame from scrap steel. They welded a pivoting mount to this frame, bolting the Zolotorn firmly in place. The gun's bipod was removed. It was now the motorcycle's weapon. A metal box welded to the sidecar held 16 of the long, bulky rounds. It was a terrifyingly exposed platform. The gunner, who would also be the rider, would have to stop, aim, and fire from a completely stationary position, making himself a perfect target. There was no armor, no shield. The motorcycle's only advantage was what it had always possessed: speed and surprise. At dawn on May 27th, Holloway was given his new, horrifying assignment. He was no longer just a messenger. He was to act as a mobile reconnaissance and harassment unit. His orders: patrol the road south of the canal, report on German movements, and if the opportunity presented itself, engage enemy light armor and reconnaissance vehicles. He was not expected to stop a full panzer assault. He was, in essence, a flea being asked to bite a wolf. By 0800 hours, Holloway set out, the weight of the Zoloturn making the motorcycle handle sluggishly. The morning was overcast, with a fine drizzle that made the cobbled roads slick. The sound of artillery grew steadily louder from the south. He reached a wooded ridge overlooking the road to the village of Loken. What he saw from his vantage point stole the breath from his lungs. Stretched out along the road for nearly half a mile was the vanguard of the German 6th Panzer Division. There were at least 15 Panzer III tanks, their short 37mm guns pointing forward like inquisitive snouts. Mixed among them were SDK, FC 251, half-tracks filled with Panzer grenadiers, and several lighter reconnaissance vehicles. They were advancing in a loose column, but with purpose. They were heading straight for a vulnerable, lightly defended stretch of the Labasi Canal. Holloway estimated he had 10, maybe 15 minutes before the lead tanks would be in position to assault the British trenches on the far bank. He had a direct line to the battalion command post via a field telephone at a nearby relay station. He could report and withdraw. That was his mission. But as he watched the steel column roll forward, a cold, defiant anger pushed aside the fear. He had a 20mm cannon. They did not know he was there. Holloway made his choice. He would not just observe. He guided the heavy motorcycle down a hidden farm track, his heart hammering against his ribs. He emerged onto the main road behind the tail end of the German column. His plan was as simple as it was insane. Hit the rear, cause confusion, and force the column to halt and deal with him, buying precious minutes for the defenders at the canal. He positioned the bike behind a low stone wall at a bend in the road, the engine idling roughly. He dismounted, his hands trembling as he worked the heavy bolt of the Zolotorn, chambering the first massive round. The last vehicles in the column were a pair of Hork command cars and a supply truck. He aimed at the truck's engine block, took a deep, steadying breath, and fired. The sound was cataclysmic, a deafening crack boom that echoed off the stone buildings of the nearby hamlet. The recoil of the 20mm gun shoved the entire motorcycle sideways several inches. The shot was true. The truck suit erupted in steam and smoke, the vehicle lurching to a halt, blocking part of the road. German soldiers spilled out of the command cars, scrambling for cover, utterly confused. They were being engaged, but from where? By what? Holloway worked the bolt, ejected the smoking brass, and slammed another round home. He fired again at the nearest command car. The 20mm shell punched through its thin armor and exploded inside. The response was immediate and violent. A storm of machine gun fire, the distinctive rapid clatter of MG-34s ripped through the air, shredding the stone wall he hid behind. Chips of rock stung his face. It was pinned. Worse, the sound of tank engines changed. They were shifting gears, turning. The rear 3 Panzer IIs in the column began to pivot their turrets, their commanders scanning for the threat. Holloway was now in a nightmare duel. He was facing 3 main battle tanks, each mounting a coaxial machine gun and a main cannon that could obliterate his position with a single round. He had maybe 13 rounds left. The drizzle turned into a steady rain, mixing with the sweat on his brow and blurring his vision. He made a desperate decision. He kick-started the BSA, the engine roaring to life. He would not stay and die in this ambush spot. He threw the motorcycle into gear and shot out from behind the wall, accelerating down a narrow side lane parallel to the main road. Machine gun tracers chased him, stitching the mud and cobbles at his rear wheel. For a few fleeting seconds, he had broken contact, but he could hear the deeper growl of a tank engine giving chase. One of the Panzers had detached from the column, crashing through a hedgerow to follow him. He was being hunted. He skidded to a stop behind a large brick farmhouse. He could hear the tank grinding closer, its tracks crushing stone and wood. Dismounted. Hefted the Zolotorn from its mount and dragged it to the corner of the building. He was no longer on a motorcycle. He was an infantryman with a single, heavy anti-tank rifle, about to face a tank at point-blank range. The Panzer III nosed into the farmyard, its long barrel sweeping for a target. The commander, standing in his cupola, was shouting orders. He was just 30 yards away. Holloway raised the Zolotorn, its weight almost unbearable. He aimed not at the thick frontal glacis plate, but at the thinner side armor of the turret, just below the commander. Führer. Führer. The shells struck with a brilliant spark of metal on metal. It did not penetrate. It gouged a deep scar and ricocheted skyward with a shriek. But it had the intended effect. The tank commander ducked inside, slamming his hatch shut. The Panzer halted, momentarily blinded. Holloway had its attention, but he had also revealed his exact position. The tank's coaxial machine gun opened up, hosing the corner of the farmhouse with 7.92mm fire. Bricks disintegrated. Holloway was trapped, the motorcycle 10 yards away, his only escape now under direct, heavy fire. Wounded by flying brick fragments, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Holloway realized his only chance was to regain the one advantage he had ever possessed: mobility. The tank's machine gun fire was methodical, chewing its way towards his position. He had moments. With a surge of adrenaline, he broke from cover in a low, scrambling crouch. Bullets kicked up dirt at his heels. He reached the motorcycle, its engines still mercifully running. He did not have time to remount the heavy Zor. He left it lying in the mud. Instead, he reached for the other weapon strapped to the bike's frame, a weapon everyone had overlooked in the focus on the 20mm cannon. It was a standard-issue British No. 36 mils bomb grenade, but it had been modified by the same inventive engineers. They had taken several grenades and bound them together with tape around a central charge, creating a crude but powerful satchel charge. Holloway grabbed this improvised bomb. The Panzer, hearing the motorcycle rev, began to turn its hull, bringing its main gun to bear. It was a slow mechanical movement. Holloway gunned the engine and aimed the BSA, not away from the tank, but directly at it. He weaved erratically, a tiny, speeding target against the backdrop of the farm. The tank's machine gun tracked him, rounds whining past. As he closed to within 15 yards, he pulled the pin on the bundled grenades, keeping the safety lever depressed. He did not throw it. He rode straight towards the tank's left side, the side opposite the main gun's arc. At the last possible second, as the tank's whole machine gunner tried to depress his weapon to target him, Holloway lobbed the charge onto the tank's engine deck, just above the rear grills. Pause. He wrenched the handlebars, laying the bike into a desperate, sliding turn that sent it skidding into the cover of a wooden shed. He hit the ground, rolling. 2 seconds later, the charge detonated. The explosion was not a penetrating kill. It was a concussive, destructive blast of flame and fragmentation directly atop the tank's vulnerable engine compartment. The grills were smashed, fuel lines severed, and the engine seized in a cloud of smoke and fire. The Panzer III shuddered and died, becoming a immobilized, burning hulk. The crew, stunned and likely wounded, began to bail out of the hatches. Holloway didn't wait to see more. He scrambled back to his motorcycle, righted it, and sped away. Not back towards the main road, but deeper into the network of farm lanes. Behind him, the 2 other pursuing tanks had been delayed by the wreck of their companion and the confusing maze of walls and hedges. He had broken contact. But his mission was not over. The main German column, though delayed and now wary, was still advancing. Holloway, using his knowledge of the local tracks, circled wide. He re-emerged onto the main road a mile further back, near the stalled head of the column. The lead tanks were now stationary, their commanders conferring, infantry deployed in a defensive perimeter. They were wasting time. Precisely what the defenders at the canal needed. From a new position behind a haystack, Holloway he had no more heavy weapons, only his rifle, but he fired carefully aimed shots at the dismounted Panzer grenadiers and vehicle commanders. Not to kill many, but to sow further confusion and convince the Germans they were facing a larger, prepared force of infantry. The German response was another furious burst of machine gun and even light cannon fire, but it was directed at phantoms in the mist and rain. The critical element of surprise was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty in the German command. Was this a delaying action by a rearguard? Were there minefields ahead? Anti-tank guns? For over 40 minutes, James Holloway, a single dispatch rider on a modified motorcycle, became a phantom menace to an entire Panzer battalion. He hit, he ran, he reappeared elsewhere. He was a one-man harassment force. The precious time Holloway bought was measured in hours. The lead elements of the 6th Panzer Division did not launch their assault on the Labassi Canal until late afternoon on May 27th. By then, British engineers had strengthened the defenses, and critical reinforcements had been rushed to the sector. The German attack was eventually repulsed with heavy losses, stabilizing that segment of the Dunkirk perimeter for another crucial day. Exhausted, out of ammunition, and his motorcycle damaged by small arms fire, Holloway eventually made his way back to British lines. He reported not just the enemy's strength, but his own actions. His story was met with a mixture of disbelief and awe. He had not destroyed a column of tanks. He had immobilized one Panzer III, damaged several soft-skinned vehicles, and, most importantly, he had disrupted the enemy's tempo and will at a decisive moment. For his actions on May 27, 1940, Private James Holloway was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the Zekanized Award for gallantry in the face of the enemy for other ranks. The citation praised his exceptional initiative, daring, and devotion to duty, noting that his single-handed harassment of a superior enemy force directly contributed to the successful defense of a vital sector. The motorcycle itself, the BSM-20 with its welded sidecar and Zoloturn mount, did not survive the war. It was destroyed in a later air attack during the evacuation, but the concept did not die. Holloway's improvised stand inspired further, more formal experiments with armed motorcycles, particularly in North Africa, where units like the Long-Range Desert Group used machine-gun-armed bikes for reconnaissance and hit-and-run attacks. James Holloway survived Dunkirk and the war, returning to a quiet life in London. He rarely spoke of that wet morning in France. Yet, his story stands as a powerful testament to the impact of individual courage and adaptability in the face of overwhelming force. It underscores a fundamental truth of war, that technology and numbers alone do not guarantee victory. Sometimes, the determination of one man on a motorcycle, armed with nothing but a cannon and sheer nerve, can alter the tide of battle, if only for a few precious hours. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. A story where speed and audacity face down steel and firepower. A story that proves heroism is not defined by the size of your weapon, but by the strength of your will. Subscribe to our channel as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.